I'd like to say a big thank you to our sponsors, Talent Insights. Talent Insights are Australia's leading specialist data recruitment business. With offices in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, they're experts at providing recruitment strategy and building data teams for clients across industries Australia-wide. They provide recruitment solutions for all roles across the data lifecycle, including data engineering, data science, advanced analytics, customer and marketing insights, business intelligence, data product managers, and data governance. They're skilled at finding the best permanent and contract hires for your business needs, as well as statement of work, project focus, data resources. At Talent Insights, relationships matter most. I can say from first-hand experience, Talent Insights are fantastic to work with. Whether you're a business leader within an HR network or a specialist data candidate, Talent Insights should be the first company you turn to for all your data recruitment needs. Find them at talentinsights.com.au.
This special episode is a recording from a live webinar we ran back in February as part of our Future-Proofing Data Platforms online event. It's a battle of opinions where our esteemed guests debated the pros and cons of centralized versus decentralized architecture. It turned out to be a really interesting session that would actually help you determine where best to apply each architecture. Advocating for decentralized platforms is Naveen Siddareddy, Data Solutions Architect at PlayStation USA, and advocating for centralized platforms is Rohan Dhupelia, Data Platform Senior Manager at Atlassian. Let us know your thoughts by leaving us a message or emailing info@datafuturology.com.
Now the Tech War session for the day. We're gonna be discussing different perspectives on data architectures. So we have on one side the centralized view, on the other side the decentralized view. We're gonna be discussing the pros and cons of both sides, trying to argue in a way that we can convince as many people to each of the sides. And then we'll see how the debate pans out. I will be posting in the chat for people to put their votes where you guys see that they should go. So essentially, there's a lot of in the data architecture. There's lots of buzzwords, and there's up and coming architectures like data mesh, data fabric, data virtualization that are pushing us into a decentralized data architecture. From a centralized perspective, we have the data warehouse, the data lake, where the data lives in one place. So let's discuss both of those and how they apply in organizations. Advocating for decentralized platforms, we got Naveen Siddareddy, Data Solutions Architect from PlayStation. Naveen, how are you doing today?
Doing good, Pip. How's it going?
Great. Thank you so much for being here. And advocating for centralized platforms is Rohan Dhupelia. He's the Data Platform Senior Manager at Atlassian. Rohan, how are you doing today?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. How are you?
Very, very good. So I might get Naveen to kick us off with his view for decentralized platforms first as an opening statement, and then I'll ask the same from Rohan, and we'll take it away.
All right. Yeah. So my take on decentralization comes from the real world. I consider the world map as a decentralized system for different domains. And they communicate, I would say using events, but they're functioning by their own, and they use their own tool sets, like their own governments in the real world. That's where I come from, and I applied the same analogy to the enterprise, where different domains exist, and they have their own, governments and their own way of doing things. And that's the way to go, and that's where I come from. That's a quick introduction and why I would argue for decentralization.
I feel like you're throwing the poll off a bit quick there. We haven't even given the folks a chance to see my point of view.
Yeah, so I assume that the point was to say get a view on what is people's incoming perspectives, and then where do we get them to after the debate.
All right. Fair enough.
Yeah, love the idea, and I jumped on and made the poll. Rohan, from your perspective, tell us your opening statement.
All right. It was actually quite interesting. Naveen and I caught up before this, and I was like, I think I'm totally going to agree with him. And I agree. Like, we should decentralize. We should decentralize, and there's not really an argument for centralizing. But like throughout a discussion, I realized, oh wait, we actually have this thing that we disagree about. And for me, it's like I completely agree that ownership of data should be decentralized. So teams should, or departments or domains should have complete ownership of their data and be able to decide what they present to other domains within your organization. What I disagree on is that tooling and infrastructure should be decentralized. I think there's a lot of learnings and a lot of governance that comes through a centralized set of tooling and a centralized set of infrastructure. And rather than teams having to ultimately reinvent the wheel, we can all share on that same common platform.
Great. So yeah, starting to diversify the at least the perspectives on the data ownership versus the platforms. Any views from your side, Naveen?
Yeah. So that's where I think we differ on the tooling side. I guess Rohan brought up other point as well, governance. So where I agree on the centralization piece, but when it comes to tooling, I feel like there are a couple of elements that has changed from earlier world, which is open source, and then the whole cloud model, and then the cost models, right? Like, to take an example, pay-per-use, managed services, and licenses. And when it comes to cloud, you pretty much took out the common activities that we used to do in data world, DBAs, and with the new tool called DBT, right? We even took out the developer, really. We used to have developers to do development, but it's gone. All these, right, are playing a big role in how technology has moved. So what I'm trying to get at is basically the power is being moved from the infrastructure to the analyst. So analyst pretty much has power to pick the tools. Whereas I agree that there has to be a platform like iOS, right? It's iOS's operating system, but then as a consumer, I have a bunch of apps to do these. We're not agreeing that one banking app would do everything for me, but I would just pick and choose the tools that I need for my specific function. So on the same lines, the business unit actually can, go for whatever tool they need, but we can have a common iOS kind of platform, So the tooling wise, I think power should be given to the analyst to decide what works. Like Excel, till date, Excel is the most powerful tool for the analyst. Even though we introduce so many things from centralized IT infrastructure, they still prefer that. So I think coming from that perspective, the tools, open source, and the separation of concerns is another big thing, where the monolithic database has been broken down into smaller pieces, one for discovery, one for compute, one for storage. So the analyst can pick and choose just for storage. Maybe he's good at only storing files, like a transaction system. Maybe another one is only interested in querying, So they could pick and choose. So I think it gives them a leverage. So that's where I come from, like saying power should be given to the analyst. Yeah. Decide the tools. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. It's definitely a growing trend to empower people more and more. Rohan, how about from your side?
I think the challenge of giving anyone anything, there's a few challenges. One is interoperability, having everyone land their data on the same plane and have it accessible across every plane. So if you have folks exposing Excel spreadsheets as a data set, and you have folks exposing a Parquet data set or a table in Postgres, you're going to have a very difficult time trying to get some level of interoperability between those data sets and create new domains based on those data sets. Having everything through a shared plane and having everything through a common, landed in a common place is quite beneficial. And I guess that's like why at Atlassian we've kind of focused on, we want to democratize data. We want every domain to have ownership of their data. But at the same time, we've provided a common single data lake because we want everyone to be able to build off each other and build up their own new data sets at the same time. we also want to avoid people ultimately, like I said before, reinventing the wheel. We don't want to have teams churning and spending more time, with high resources, creating new or figuring out things that we've already figured out in our team.
Actually, I agree with you, Rohan. So the interoperability and also even the support is a problem for the tools, right? Like, when it comes to actually supporting the tool sets, they could go on and buy tools that are not really supported well. So on the support side, I was thinking about this, and nowadays the tools are cloud-based, and their instrumentation is built into it. We rarely go back and reach out to them. They already know that this is down or something like that. But interoperability, right? So I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but I think domain-driven is designs consider events as the communication channel. I think that's the way to go. I mean, I haven't seen any architecture. Even data mesh talks about actually treating data as a product, but not about how they communicate together. So as much as we consider data as a product, we still need a way to communicate from one domain to another. For example, finance to marketing. I do have a slide if I could share, but the thing is, let's say a production unit says there is a delay in producing a car. So that is an event, right? So if we could store that event in an event store, and every other unit does the same, and we would consume the event. So it's completely decoupled, right? So there's no need to have to say shared platform is nothing but event store, rather than having a platform to do the activity. But I haven't seen any architecture really implemented that way. I've seen in the programming world, but not in the data world yet. So yeah,
that's a good point. It seems like at least we agree that like having some level of interoperability, and whether that be like topics on a Kafka event bus or tables in a centralized metastore of some sort is ideal, right? I think we at least agree there.
Yeah, 100%. I agree that, we need to have some kind of event mechanism to decouple and have a centralized event mechanism. It's more like a history book, I would say. And people who want to go back and look into the history and gain something, they would go back and do it. And they want to react to the current event, they would react to that, Yeah.
So some level of interoperability is important. But I think where we probably still disagree is you think the way that data gets into that interoperable space can be up to the user ultimately.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I'm still with that. Yeah.
Okay. And are there perspectives around the skills required for people to plug into that data ecosystem? That when people are working with the tools they're comfortable with, might be lower barriers. If we have a centralized one, they might need additional support. What do you guys think from a skills perspective across all the players in the ecosystem?
I'll go first here then. So like one thing I want to do is scale out domains that use data in Atlassian without having to scale out data engineers. That's my goal. I want to ultimately have a lot less folks involved in actually understanding how to do like distributed compute and how to, understand like table dynamics as the same extent of our team. But I want to be able to enable every domain to do this ultimately. So that's why I feel that we should try and take the burden away from them and have ownership of those lower levels of the stack, so that all they really need to know is like at a bare minimum, I just need to know how to write SQL, or I need to know how to push data to this endpoint, and that's it. And like any software engineer should be able to do something like that ultimately.
How about from your side, Naveen?
Yeah, I think skill set, I leave it up to the analyst, really. I do agree to an extent. That's what I've been doing till date, saying that, okay, I can provide a better platform for the analyst to do queries. But what I realized is that it never worked. It takes a long time to, convince the user that please get out of Excel, right? But that doesn't happen. I do see the power of Excel there. And that's where I came up with this adoption that, Excel is a simple interface. And I wish Excel, right, when you write a query, it automatically on the Snowflake would go and distribute computing, then users would be very happy. They would say, oh, I wrote my query in Excel, and it just goes back to Amazon, computes everything, and comes back. So I think I actually, skill set wise, I don't think like SQL is the only thing that I would expect them to have. But otherwise, when it comes to picking what they need, the tools, it could be Snowflake if they want to just write queries. It could be DBT, to just get on board and start working. But I don't have any preference for the analyst to have this specific skill.
Yeah, great. And tell me about the data ownership then, and maybe that's an area where we can further explore that. Who gets to own data quality? Who gets to decide what is shared, how it is shared? Tell me about that space.
All right, I'll start. I absolutely have this. I think we have a shared view that data ownership needs to be with the domains that like are producing or consuming the data, right? I think I have a challenge in Atlassian in that there is a reluctance for data producers to really own data. And part of it's just cultural. Like there's just, we throw our analytical data to this endpoint. We don't give we don't care what you do with it. Ultimately, there's no ownership of it once it leaves their product, their microservice, or whatever their service is that they're ultimately producing. And so that's the big challenge we have, and like things that we're thinking about how we can start to change this culture in Atlassian and how we can start to get folks to take more ownership of their data. Things like we want to try and follow a model similar to like our growth team in Atlassian, which basically has squads that go and sit with our domains and tries to get them to understand the value of owning data and so what value that comes to the other teams in Atlassian. The other thing we're trying to look at is probably embedding to some extent like data product managers in each of the domains that we have across Atlassian. So it's an unsolved problem at Atlassian, domain ownership, data ownership. And I agree completely that data ownership should not be central. But I think that where we are definitely struggling is how do we actually decentralize that?
And what do you think about the fork or the separation between the producers and the consumers of the data? And is there something that can be done to make them one and the same?
What do you mean by fork?
That they sound like they're different people. So that essentially there's not, say, a business unit head over an operational area where the data is created within the systems that their people use, and then that same person is responsible for improving the return or the value of that function, which would turn them into a data consumer, largely of the data that they create, and then they are aligned and they want to push for improvement in their area with the that are driven by the data that they create. So whether there's some alignment there in terms of the responsibilities that can create the consumers, the producers put them as consumers as well.
Yeah. So where we sit today is like we have some teams which are producers and consumers of their same data, and those teams are a lot more effective at iterating on their data sets and making them better ultimately. But as soon as they're producing data and not being a consumer of that data, or producing it and not publishing it in a space that's interoperable where they get feedback from other folks to improve the data sets, that's where things start to break down, start to fall down. So that's ultimately what we're trying to solve at the moment, is like, how do we get people to actually understand how their data is being used across the company, and how do we get people to roadmap and put time into actually improving the data sets based on what other people are doing in the company, and how do we stop consuming domains from actually taking on this burden and saying, this producing domain of data doesn't give a shit about this, I'm just going to have to hack away at this and make this work for me in my use case. And that's really what we're trying to solve.
Yeah, and I wonder to what extent it's completely inevitable that consumers will have to tailor the data during an ingestion for their purpose. Naveen, from your perspective, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm not going to take specific examples, but let me take a real world example. So in real world, I think history books are data books, right? Like in the sense, data is nothing but history books. So maybe it's influenced by a geographical or a political scenario, but at the end, you pretty much have all the data sitting in history. So I feel like we don't need really domains to own it. We just need a centralized event system that captures everything that happens in every domain. And that way there is nobody's saying I own it, I own this data. There is no data concept itself. You just capture all the events that happen, and if there is a conflict, like I said, in the political geographical scenario, there might be too much power to the revenue department. Whoever generates more revenue, they might define what that event is. They might say, yep, this is where I got my money, so they overrule the other event. But what essentially I'm trying to say is, I don't think data is an attribute here. We should talk about events more when it comes to the commonality in the enterprise or interoperability. And second thing is, when it comes to agreeing with common elements here across the domains, graphs are the way. I know there's no way we can convince everyone to be on board with tables and with processes. There has to be a way to allow the so for example, taking an example of SAP, right? They have cost centers, profit centers, and things like these. A finance team would view them as differently, but when it comes to another department, data analytics may not consider even cost center an element to analyze their stuff. So a real graph would be able to accommodate different relationship between two different entities, and that would be the common, people used to call it master data, but then I'm talking about master data as a graph, where it would allow all the business unit to, be conform to the relationships, It could break over time. Yeah.
We're sort of heading in that direction as well, like trying to provide a graph and trying to, I guess, expose, like, we expect that like particular domains of data would appear in that graph, but be exposed in, like, from an analytical perspective and operational perspective in very different ways. But at least having this graph, this map of where all data is and how it relates is something we're trying to achieve as well.
Yeah, the point Philip made was schema on write and schema on read, basically, right? Producer and consumer think differently. And Kafka tried to solve this problem by schema registry, right? To have like common, a schema registry where everybody conforms to it. The problem is that schema registry is not very flexible, like a graph. So it's very rigid. So it's a hard problem to solve. Yeah.
I love it. I know we have about a minute left, but I love that we've been able to explore the topic so thoroughly in such a short amount of time by starting with quite divergent views, finding the areas of differences, exploring those, finding areas of overlap, clarifying those. It's been great. I just posted the question of where do people sit now, centralized, decentralized, or both. And yeah, there's been decentralized, there's been both, there's been talks about the concept of a master data as a graph being excellent. So I love the fact that we're helping, we're bringing clarity to these discussions, and I hope that people are getting value from this. Naveen, Rohan, thank you so much for your perspectives, for your time. It's been outstanding.
Cool, thank you. And it's a different debate that I've seen from other architecture decisions. So interesting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you both so much. And now we'll jump into the multi-cloud session. So I hope to see everyone there. Thank you.